MREA presents the Rise Up podcast.
And now a moment to thank Kilowatt sponsor AM 950. AM 950 strives to provide the best progressive radio programming available and has local programming that gives voices to all communities with shows like Native Roots Radio and Twin Cities Pride Amplified. For more information, visit am950radio.com.
Welcome back to the Rise Up podcast. I am your host, Nick Hyla with the Midwest Renewable Energy Association, and today we are joined by Peter Lindstrom. Peter, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Nick. Thank you so much for having me.
Peter is the manager of public sector and community engagement at the Clean Energy Resource Teams with the University of Minnesota's Regional Sustainable Development Partnership and Extension. Peter focuses on outreach and education, leads efforts to engage local units of government, including cities, counties, townships, and school districts, in exploring approaches for financing energy efficiency and clean energy. You were a mayor of Falcon Heights, Minnesota, and you continue to represent District 10 on the Metropolitan Council, which we'll talk about that organization and what they do in the Twin Cities. Additionally, your career includes leadership positions as Assistant Director of the Center for Sciences, Technology, and Public Policy at the University of Minnesota Humphrey School. You were the Executive Director of Sci Math Minnesota and Vice President of Public Affairs at Minnesota High Tech Association. You've been doing this for a while, huh?
Most of those things are true. Just kidding. They're all true. And yes, I've been around for a little bit.
Well, maybe we can start with your current position at the Clean Energy Resource Team. So we call it CERTs. So who is CERTs and what do you do?
Can I just tell you, Nick, before I talk to you about CERTs, what absolute pleasure it is to be on this podcast, because I am MREA's number one fan, and I'm not kidding. You're such a tremendous asset for our region, for our nation. I'm a proud graduate of some of your training. Last summer, I went through some training that your association conducted on solar, and it was top notch. So 2 thumbs up, the biggest recommendation.
This is not a paid endorsement either, but we'll take it. We'll take it.
Yeah, you're going to send me a $20 bill later on.
How about this? Instead, I'll give you a free beer in our parking lot at the Energy Fair on June 22nd in Wisconsin.
Yes, that's perfect. So I love the training. I'm getting the certs. I love the training, and I love the fact that we're going to talk about solar for schools, and you folks were early on with solar for schools and were very helpful in CERTs' work on solar for schools. So thank you very much for the work that you do. And so CERTs, Clean Energy Resource Teams, we've been around for, now over 20 years, 21 years or so. And we're a bit of a goofy organization in that we are definitely not a for-profit. We're technically not a nonprofit either. We are what's called a partnership organization. And we have 4 partner organizations that make up CERTs. One's a regional development commission down in Southwest Minnesota. The second is the Great Plains Institute, a nonprofit here in the Twin Cities. The state of Minnesota, we work very closely with the Department of Commerce. They're one of our partners. And then last but not least, the University of Minnesota, where our offices are located. Those 4 entities make up CERTs, and our mission is really just to help communities do clean energy projects all across the state. We are a statewide organization. So border to border, we are helping communities do clean energy projects, and that's communities really broadly defined. Nick, it could be cities, counties, schools. I work very closely with those organizations. But it could be farmers, it could be faith communities, it could be small businesses, really anybody. If you're interested in being more energy efficient or using renewable energies, and you just need a little technical assistance, perhaps to get from A to Z or get over the finish line, then folks are turning to CERTs. And then the other big role that we play, Nick, is storytelling. So just getting the word out that these organizations, these entities are doing these types of projects and that they're working right here in the great state of Minnesota, and how they've done that, that's a big role for CERTs to play as well. We have a super active website, super active newsletter, thousands of subscribers. So that's one takeaway for folks listening to this podcast today. Please check us out online and subscribe to our newsletter.
Yeah, two things before we move on to the Metropolitan Council. One is, in my mind, you all are kind of the unsung hero of the Minnesota policy and implementation successes for solar and energy efficiency. You're a leading Midwest state, and that is because you're so good at the education and storytelling and outreach role and your partnership. And just as one example that I really appreciated, and we're going to talk about this in detail later, is when Minnesota first passed its community solar gardens enabling legislation, CERTs you all dedicated yourself to putting out a consumer's guide for this quickly growing and very complicated landscape for consumers. And that is still extremely useful today. And I have sent hundreds and hundreds of people to your website to use that. So it's just one example of this like educational role you all play. And if people don't know you, they should. So visit the CERTs website. But maybe also tell us about.
Send you the $20 now.
Yeah. Maybe also tell us about the Metropolitan Council and the work that they do and your work there.
Proud member of the Metropolitan Council. I'm a council member, so that's an appointed role. It's not a full-time job for me. It's an amazing organization, Nick. It's been around since the late 1960s. And really, the broad role of the Met Council is to do things that are more challenging or not as efficient to do in each city. So think about transit, for example, as one of our big roles. So we have, even if you just say transit, that can be broken out in a lot of different ways. It could be the regular bus routes, bus rapid transit, light rail transit, metro mobility, which is a key service of the Met Council, and more. So it's transit, it's wastewater. We have 9 wastewater treatment plants. We have 640 miles of what are called interceptor sewers, and we clean, it's like 200 million gallons of wastewater every single day. It's a key public health, public service. So it's before that water hits the Mississippi River, the St. Croix River, the Minnesota River, it's treated to the highest standard. So it's transit, it's wastewater, it's community development. And so it's around community planning. We're right in the middle of putting together our next regional plan for the Twin Cities, 7-county regional area. And it's other really important areas like affordable housing. So we are the Housing and Redevelopment Authority for much of the Twin Cities. And what that means is we have 7,000 federal vouchers that low-income people are using for housing, which is just so critical. As you know, Nick, housing is just the baseline for success. If you don't have a roof over your head, it's so difficult to find a job, to keep a job, to go to school, to send your kids to school. Just all of those baseline things for success in life really depends on stable housing. So we help with that. And then, Nick, we have 10 regional park agencies that we work with closely on planning and helping fund them. And of those 10 park agencies, they have 56 regional parks. So think like Como Park they have a zoo there. It's a big park in St. Paul. Other really big, well-used parks that get tens of millions of visitors every single year. And so those are just the big items that the Met Council works on. And again, I'm a council member. I was appointed in 2019, and it's a real pleasure to serve on this organization. And it's big on climate. You think about climate and sustainability in general, it can play a real leading role in moving the football forward on climate or sustainability related efforts in our area. Just one example comes to mind. I mentioned we have 9 wastewater treatment plants. We have a ton of solar on the buffer land around these wastewater treatment plants. You think about it, you're never going to put housing right next to a wastewater treatment plant. You're never going to put a business next to a wastewater treatment plant. But a solar array, that's fine. That's a perfect spot. There's nothing blocking the sunshine. Solar doesn't mind if it gets a little smelly from time to time. That's just fine. Keeps doing its thing. And so we have quite a bit of solar around our wastewater treatment plants. And there are many other examples of ways that the Met Council is leading the way or working with our partners to help in the sustainability effort.
Yeah, that perspective that you gain there, all of the public infrastructure and public planning, and from your energy education work, energy underwrites all of that. And you've been at the table talking about this. So I guess maybe let's go back in time a little bit and thinking through your experiences at CERTs and the Met Council. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen in the energy market in Minnesota and the greater Twin Cities area?
You bet. Well, I'll tell you, I started right around 2014, and you mentioned that community solar gardens were just launching right around that time. And you're right, CERTS has taken a major leadership role in educating folks starting at that time about community solar garden and building upon that and continuing that effort up until now. Right at that time, and we can even go back earlier to 2007 and the Next Generation Energy Act and the goals that were outlined there, and what a bipartisan effort that was to really start us on this journey. And then 2013 with the community solar garden. I was just looking at the graph of solar just a few moments ago in Minnesota. And at that time, 2013-ish, 2014, boy, it was real flat, really low, the amount of solar. I want to say it was around maybe 30 megawatts or so, grand total, all in. And it has just been, that graph showed an absolute hockey stick, just going straight up almost with solar in Minnesota. And now we're up to north of 1.5 gigawatts, heading towards 2 any day here, it seems like, which is super exciting. And so my journey, I mentioned that I started in 2013, but you mentioned I was a mayor before that, before being appointed to the Met Council, the mayor of Falcon Heights, small community here in the Twin Cities, about 5,000 residents. And in 2011, we put in a 40 kW solar array. And I remember, Nick, that was one of the largest arrays at the time. I mean, it was like, that was big news. It was like just a few cities had done that at the time. It was like holy cow, that was pretty amazing. And now we talk about a 40 kW array, and it's kind of like, well, that's cool. That's cool. Nice job. Awesome. High five.
I still think it's big news, for the record, in the right place.
I think it's big news. You put in a 2 kW array. I'm like, woo! I'm all excited about it. Yeah, no doubt about it. I'm all in on anybody doing anything is fantastic. But now we're seeing cities and schools and other businesses, other organizations putting in hundreds of kW sized arrays or larger sometimes. So that's been a big change. And certainly I would say energy storage is really coming into its own. The rise of electric vehicles has been a game changer. By the way, Nick, I think I've used the words game changer more in the last year or two because of all the different public policy changes than I ever have before. Between what's happening at the state level and what's happening at the federal level, it's just been pretty amazing. So storage, electric vehicles have been a big change for the benefit, for the positive as well since that time.
Yeah, let's talk more about the one. I mean, obviously, one of the big changes in the Twin Cities area has been the Community Solar Garden Program. So that was enabled in 2013 through this Minnesota Solar Energy Jobs Act, had a number of provisions. Two of them were really transformational. One was the value of solar study, which I still think every state in the country should do if they haven't, is figure out what the value of someone's solar on their rooftop is worth to everybody else. And this community solar garden law, which allowed for up to 1 megawatt size community solar arrays, that Xcel Energy was required then to mediate the benefits on everybody's utility bill. And at the time, I remember the debate, and there really wasn't all that much anticipation from the utility side about a lot of community solar. I think that at the time they were like, oh, maybe 70 megawatts or something total. And before you knew it, you were at 900 megawatts installed in years, and just a giant deployment of community solar. So talk about that experience. Who was subscribing to those gardens? What do they look like? And then let's talk about the recent legislation and how that's changed.
When I started a decade ago, we were at something like 30 megawatts, 2013, 2014 timeframe. Then community solar garden law was passed. And right at that time, some of the early subscribers were local governments. Local governments are great subscribers to CSG's community solar gardens because hey, Peter Lindstrom, he may be here 5 years from now or 15 years from now, or I may not be. Who knows? Same with a business. But guess what? Falcon Heights is going to be here, or the city of Minneapolis is definitely going to be here. And so those entities, those really large energy users, number one, and then the fact that they're going to be around here for a while really made those local governments very good subscribers, good customers for community solar gardens. And then you add on top of that they're very interested in encouraging the development of solar in the state and meeting their own sustainability goals. All of those things added together meant that local governments were very interested in this. But it's brand new territory, and it's like, oh my gosh, these are long-term contracts. 20-year contracts. There's a lot of fine print. And so there was a lot of learning that we had to do together. At that time, we formed a bulk buy program with, I think it was upwards of 25, 30 local governments. The very big ones, the Minneapolis, St. Paul, Hennepin County, Ramsey County was involved, as well as really small communities. Falcon Heights, for example, 5,000 population. And others like that. We could hitch our wagon onto these larger entities that had more experience with these types of efforts, all learn together and get some benefits of a bulk purchase. And that was a really successful initiative. I think at the end of the day, these local governments subscribed, don't quote me on this, but 25, 30 megawatts worth of community solar. So very successful effort at that time, and it's just continued to grow, and like you said, it's now 900 plus megawatts and evolving with the legislation from this past year or so, and in a way that I think will be positive.
Right. Yeah. So one of the interesting facets of community solar is, there are motivations from the jurisdictions to it, but it's really bill savings, right? They're subscribing at some level, whether purchasing up front or paying some payment, but all of the electricity generation is credited off their utility bills. So what we saw in those first 900 megawatts was a lot of business subscribers and business and local governments and larger institutions, because it was easier for the community solar developers to get customers that way. One big customer sells lots of gardens, and the business proposition was there. So you had the benefit of these like larger peer groups and all of the intelligence and capacity to do that. And that kind of led to this change in the legislation, right? So do you want to talk about some of the provisions? I just want to say, again, impressed with Minnesota, lead the nation in community solar gardens, and then improve the program and keep it going through legislation. So very, very admirable. So what happened? You passed some more legislation, and what does it do?
That's right. And I'll back up by saying Clean Energy Resource Teams doesn't do any sort of advocacy. So we're not down at the Capitol pushing for House File 10 or fighting against Senate File 50 or anything like that. Our role is really to provide educational resources, technical assistance, things like that. So the legislature did their thing, and then it's our role. Part of our role is to educate consumers about the changes and assist them as needed. So you're right. There was a significant amount of changes, and it's interesting. So the first 10 years or so of the program, lots of larger organizations signed on, and now we're seeing a shift. And one of the challenges with the initial program is these gardens had to oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes check things like credit scores for potential subscribers and other sorts of barriers around being able to come in or out of the garden. Just more and more barriers that made it more challenging for low and moderate income residents to participate. So the legislature recognized this and made some significant changes. around eliminating the need for credit score and built in a percentage of any community solar garden must specifically be designated for low and moderate income residents, as well as recognizing that a percentage, I think it's 55%, must be dedicated towards low income folks and public facing entities. So still can be those cities, counties, schools, hospitals, those types of organizations will be benefiting from the new community solar garden program.
Yeah, so changes to increase the amount of households served, increase the amount of low to moderate income households served, increase the amount of community benefit organizations served, all by these solar gardens. Also increase the size limit for the gardens.
5 megawatts, there you go, from 1 to 5, with a total cap. It was uncapped, and that's in those initial years, and we saw some pretty explosive growth, as you mentioned, and there'll be some caps in the years ahead on the total growth of gardens.
There's so much win-win in that with, the support to the local businesses by reducing, energy is a burden on the business. And if you can reduce their energy expenses, especially with in-state clean power, you've won. So of course the businesses are happy. Supporting bill reduction for people and giving access to people that are renters or don't own a house with an appropriate roof, all of these benefits. What were some of the challenges to the program? I know the quick development pace posed some kind of interconnection concerns as far as hosting capacity. Was any of that addressed in legislation?
Yes, it was. There was a requirement that the community solar garden a subscriber had to be in the county or an adjacent county where the garden is located, and those sorts of requirements went away. The result of that earlier requirement was that a lot of the community solar gardens are based on the outskirts of the Twin Cities. That pose some land use challenges as well as some grid congestion challenges as well. You look at that grid map and there's some areas near the Twin Cities that they're all red. That's not what you want to see. And that really puts a damper on residents, businesses, communities that want to put on-site solar at those locations because the transmission just can't take those electrons. So eliminating that requirement freed up those community solar gardens to be built in other areas of the state. And I think that's a positive development as well.
Yeah, and you also, even in that first legislation that enabled the community solar gardens, that legislation required some energy storage feasibility studies. I know there have been more. That is a solution to hosting capacity, plus just transparency in the capacity system. What are you seeing with energy storage in the Twin Cities? I know that there's kind of been some studies. Are you seeing more deployment of energy storage coincided with solar gardens, or what's your outlook there?
The outlook is positive. There's no question about that. I feel like we're seeing more and more of it. It seemed for a long time that it was always a year away, 5 years away, that it was kind of right around the corner. I think with the federal incentives, it used to be to take advantage of the federal tax credit, that energy storage had to be tied in with a solar array. That's no longer the case. It can be a standalone energy storage system and take advantage of a 30% tax credit. I think that's really significant. We're seeing other state incentives in that area as well. And so I know I personally am getting a lot of questions about it from folks who are interested in solar, number one, but they're asking a lot about combining that with storage. So I think the outlook is good.
That'll be very important to see how that develops in the Twin Cities area because of the amount of solar that's been installed, which is wonderful to see. Another success story out of Minnesota is the Solar on Schools program. And I know about it because we had a foundation funded, still do, Solar on Schools program. Thank you to the Cleared Solar Foundation, amazing people that fund that, and Solar for Good program in Wisconsin. And you guys stole our staff person who was running that program to run it in Minnesota. So Jack Klemke from the Department of Commerce was on our board at the time, and he knew how great Amanda was and stole her from us. So I'm not bitter. I'm happy you guys got a really great person to run that program. We want to talk about that program, what the goals are, and what's going on.
Yes, we are very fortunate. Thank you for letting the state steal Mandy, she's doing a bang up job, that's for sure. And so this program rolled out in 2021. We were very familiar with Solar for Schools work in Wisconsin. So you folks were the groundbreakers on that work. And the legislature created a grant program in 2021, and they said we're going to allocate $16 million for this grant program. We're going to split it up in half, 50-50 for schools within Xcel Energy territory and 50% for schools outside, for everywhere else outside of Xcel territory. Xcel ran their own program, and then the State Department of Commerce ran the everywhere else grant program. And last year, the legislature made some changes. They said, we're going to scrap the two programs. We're going to create just one under the State Department of Commerce. I will tell you, Nick, it's been an amazing grant program. I think my phone was ringing, my inbox was getting filled up from schools right when the ink was hardly dry from the governor signing that legislation, saying, yes, absolutely, let's move forward 110% on this. And the reason for that, number one, paying that utility bill is the second highest expense for schools. Personnel, number one, but that utility bill is a big expense for schools, so it makes sense for them to lower that utility bill. That utility bill, by the way, that's one of the only expenses that they can lower it and not impact the classroom. In fact, it benefits the classroom because they can use those savings for other areas within the school. So that's a number one, a huge incentive for schools to do this. Number two is building it into the curriculum. That's a requirement of the Solar for Schools program, is thou shall build it into the curriculum, which schools are doing a bang up job because they know that their students are going to be the energy decision makers of the future. They're going to be making decisions on energy technologies, energy public policies, energy markets, and workforce, right? Which we need so much more of. And so the fact that there's a solar array that they can see, it's right there at their school, is so impactful. And the third reason schools are interested in this is just because schools are so central to communities. And it's a great way for schools to demonstrate their commitment towards sustainability if they have a solar array either on the roof or on the ground. And they oftentimes have a display in some public location where the public can see how much that array is creating at the moment, or how much it's created last week, last month, last year. And so that's a good story for the school district to tell how they're lowering their utility bill and helping to educate the students for the future.
Yeah, it's really inspiring, and what a good use of grant dollars. We in Wisconsin, we manage this program in Wisconsin, as you mentioned, and our new program manager, Yvonne, got some support from our Office of Energy Innovation to do some more schools. But we would love to see legislation similar to that in Minnesota. My understanding in Minnesota was kind of like after the passage in 2013 of the Solar Energy Jobs Act, that was kind of like Democrats had full control over all branches of government, but that Solar on Schools legislation got bipartisan support. And I think that's really an amazing story that showcases some of the just broad benefits like you were talking about, and support for schools and the budget needs for schools.
I was going to say, Nick, there's a national report called Brighter Futures that shows the amount of schools that have some solar array. And Minnesota, just like our football teams or basketball teams, we're kind of neck and neck right there. Wisconsin is leading Minnesota in the last report in the number of schools with solar, but I'll say objects in your rear view mirror may appear closer than they actually are. So look out, Wisconsin.
You definitely are. That statistic's a little misleading because a lot of schools in Wisconsin have very small solar arrays. So, the average size that we're supporting is over 100K or over. And I know that you guys are, because that's where the schools are big energy users. Of course, they're old infrastructure, they're big spaces, and so that program's really great, and we fully expect you to pass this if you haven't already.
Also, they're huge, they're big, right? Oftentimes have flat roofs, So if they've redone that roof in the last few years, they're great sites for a nice solar array of any size.
We're in this kind of age of, there's a lot of pessimism out there, despite all of the good things that are happening and all the potential. I guess, on that, you guys have done so much good stuff. You have a lot of wind in the sails, so to speak, with some enabling legislation. What more is needed? Tell me what you foresee in Minnesota. Do you need anything else, like on the implementation side? Like if you had a magic wand, I gave this to another guest recently. You're qualified.
I need someone to create a magic wand, that's for sure. A couple of things come to mind. First of all, just the workforce side of things. I mean, like you can have the best public policy ever, but if you don't have the electricians to actually do the work, good luck to you. If you don't have the HVAC technicians, those folks in the trades to do the work, we're going to fall short. So the more that we can do to encourage young people to explore those trades, to be solar installers, wind technicians, those are some of the fastest growing jobs that we have out there. So that's number one on my wish list. And then number two is just the whole educational aspect of all of these different rebates, tax credits, incentives that are now available, not just in our state, but across the nation. Some folks are really dialed in. They know all about it. They know every tax credit and all the numbers and how it all works. And other folks are just like, just learning about it for the first time and trying to get a handle of how they can tap into that. And so what we're doing in that effort is expanding upon an effort that we started last year, and it's called the Community Energy Ambassadors Program. Super interesting. We started it last year. We had like 50 people sign up the first week. We now have over 900 community energy ambassadors. We're creating some training programs this summer. It's going to be in two different methods, I guess. One is a training program for community-based organizations who have deep roots in various communities. And we're going to help train them all about these incentives, credits, ways that low and moderate income folks can tap into these incentives. That's one thing we're doing, the training for community-based organizations. And then a separate training, like a self-directed training where people can go online, they can see some short videos about EV tax credits, for example. 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes long, or rebate programs, whatever they may be. And then at the end, they'll do a project related to that topic. At the end, they'll become certified. Get it? Certified? Certified Community Energy Ambassador.
You're really clever over there, aren't you?
Bam! There you go. So these folks, their whole role will be to help get the word out. So they'll be presenting to Lions clubs, to their church green team, to their Earth Day event, whatever it may be, and just helping to get the word out. I think that's desperately needed, and looking forward to that becoming more of a reality in the year ahead.
Well, one thing I didn't necessarily expect out of this interview is we call it in the training world. We do a lot of training and we are always sharing curriculum with technical and community colleges, and they have a term called R&D, which is rip off and duplicate. You basically take whatever good concept and you put in your curriculum. And I think I'm going to do that to this Community Energy Ambassadors program here at the MREA. I'm going to R&D that idea. It's an amazing idea. I really, really like that a lot, because one of the things that's happening in nearly every state, and in Minnesota in particular, is not only do some of the solar garden provisions target low to moderate income households, but this formula funding for home energy efficiency and electrification that's coming from the U.S. Department of Energy is targeted for low to moderate income households. And the state of Minnesota was selected for an EPA Solar for All grant, which is targeted for solar deployment at low to moderate income households. And this is not an audience that we have targeted before as a solar industry. And so community education is going to be absolutely critical. And so your ambassadors program seems perfectly poised for that. Do you have thoughts on some of the challenges and opportunities that all of this funding is bringing to people who need it, the energy savings the most, really?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a challenge for It's a welcome challenge, I'll put it that way, for the state agencies to stand up all of these programs. It's one thing for the legislature or Congress to pass the law, but then it's up to these state energy offices to really stand up the program and hire people and figure out all the rules and guidelines and roll it all out. That's taken some time, understandably. And then it's going to take a whole lot of partnering, Nick, as you know, with our community action partnership groups for weatherization, who have great connections with low and moderate income folks. It's going to take a lot of partnering with community-based organizations who have deep roots with low and moderate income residents and who are trusted partners. It's all very exciting. I mean, we have millions of dollars that are rolling into each of the states for both energy efficiency work, for solar work, for low and moderate income. It's desperately needed. We all have our work cut out for us in the weeks and months and years ahead.
We should all be excited, those of you that live in Minnesota, about the work of CERTs and all these opportunities. I know you got a lot of work, so we'll let you go. Thank you for spending the time and sharing with us. Hope to see you soon, Peter.
Nick, you can rip off and duplicate anything that CERTs does. You are hereby authorized to do so, as long as we can rip off and duplicate from all of the great work that you are doing over in Wisconsin.
Deal. Teamwork makes the dream work.
Deal. Teamwork makes the dream work. You have a great day. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you to our event sponsor, MEJ's. When you're in the mood for a hot cup of delicious coffee, come to MEJ's Coffee House. They roast their own beans weekly, and every cup is made to order, so you can count on getting full flavor in every sip. All of their coffee is fair trade and organic. Learn more at me-j's-coffee.square.site. Visit one of their central Wisconsin locations, or grab a cup at the 2024 Energy Fair. And now, a moment to thank our Kilowatt sponsor, Central Waters Brewing. Central Waters knows that how they make their delicious brews matters just as much as their distinctive taste. That's why they craft ales and lagers straight from earth to sky. From bubbling tanks to aging barrels in their brewer tap rooms, their beers are sustainably crafted using solar heat and water conservation techniques. Learn more at centralwaters.com. Visit their tap rooms in Amherst and Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or grab a pint at the 2024 Energy Fair.
The Rise Up Podcast, Season 5, Episode 9, Big Changes for Minnesota Community Solar Gardens. Special thanks to our guest, Peter Lindstrom, hosted by Nick Hyla and produced by Kyle Galloway. Made possible with support from the Sally Mead Hands Foundation.